our pleasure to have here Migdalia Carrion-Alers. It's from FHWA. So let me give you a short bio of her. So she earned a bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and a master's in transportation engineering from the University of Texas, Austin. She is FHWA's Sustainable Pavements Program Manager, guiding efforts to reduce embodied carbon, promote green procurement, and conduct life cycle assessments and cost analysis, as well as supporting pavement design policies. She focuses on sustainability and leads a team researching ground-type rubber used in Puerto Rico pavements. Previously, she worked at the Puerto Rico Department of Transportation and in the private sector. So let's give a warm welcome to Migdalia Carrion-Alers.
Thank you so much. Doing a check on the mic. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning, depending where you are joining today's webinar. It is for me a pleasure to be here today to talk about our Sustainable Pavement Program here at FHWA Administration. And I have a lot of slides, so why we don't jump in and start, and hopefully we can leave at the end minutes for us to discuss. I wouldn't like for me just to lecture. I would love to hear feedback and thoughts after the presentation. So quick disclaimer, this is part of what my legal department require me to placing any presentation that I'm giving, except for the status or regulations that I will be citing. All the contents of this presentation do not have the force of law and shouldn't be meant to be binding or implying that it is a FHWA regulation or a federal regulation. Unless otherwise noted, FHWA is the source of all images. Another slide that I'm required to place in every presentation is the acronym slide. I always recommend for you to take maybe a picture or a screenshot if you are virtually. I will do my best to spell all the acronyms throughout the presentation, but it might be a good idea for you just to grab a picture of it. Really quick overview of the things that I would like to cover during today's presentation. I would like to provide an overview of what's the FHWA Sustainable Pavement Program is and all the effort and work that we have done throughout our more than 12 years of inception. And then I would like to cover some quantifications and move more into that environmental impact component of sustainability. And what are two methodologies that we are encouraging, promoting, and that we have throughout our work move forward. And then, I hope that at the end I can provide you some ongoing and future initiatives that will help you understand how the sustainable world at the US is moving and moving forward with some of these initiatives. And then at the end, I have some resources that as we provide this slide to all of you, you can then click on it and have there for future look. So to start with, of course, the program is about sustainability, and something that we throughout the years have been coining or pushing to our recipients, and mainly our recipients at the federal government are the State Department of Transportation with the recent law that was passed November 2021. We also have and expanded that recipients to be more locals and public agencies across the nation. But something that we like to say when we talk about sustainability is that sustainability is not only about that environmental component. And some of you might have heard about sustainability and the triple bottom line and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I always like to say that sustainability is doing good engineering, is taking all the impacts and considering all the impacts. And while we are doing our project delivery to put out the best infrastructure that we can in our nation to ensure that all the decisions that we are taking is considering all these impacts. And what are those impacts? Is the environmental impact, the economic impacts, and then the social. And a way to think about sustainability is that throughout that project delivery, we are always trying to minimize this environmental impact component, but at the same time, we want to maximize the economic benefits and ensuring the equitable social outcomes. And throughout more than 40, 50 years of engineering, throughout the project delivery, we have focused a lot on this economic component, and we have throughout the work understand what are the cost benefits and methodology and analysis. And it is, the environmental impact that now throughout the past 20 years at the State Department level, that we have having this understanding and characterization of what are the environmental impacts throughout our project delivery. And that's why when you hear a lot of sustainable talks, people tend to jump directly to the environmental component, but truly, sustainability is a lot more than that. So for our program, the vision is very simple. We would like that sustainable thinking to be embraced and throughout that life cycle of all publicly owned pavements in the United States to be implemented and considered. And we do that. Our mission is to advance the knowledge and practice, and we do it in a three-pronged approach. We do a stakeholder engagement, me coming to this webinar to have this opportunity to receive feedback and for us to engage and educate and promote the sustainable thinking. And last but not least, we are also charged of developing guidance and tools to ensure that as we move the practice forward, our practitioners have tools that they can implement. As I mentioned, the program was created back in 2010, 2011. Since then, we have two phases, and now we are coming into that third phase of the program. The first 5 years of the program was for us to understand what was the state of knowledge, how we will characterize sustainability in pavements, and understanding our system. We put out a lot of resources and case studies for our stakeholders, for them to learn about it, and for all of us to start talking on a same language and same understanding. On that, there are some publications that have been coined as part of the pavement community as staple and fast looking on this topic. On 2015, we published the Pavement Lifecycle Assessment Framework that has been used in our community as we develop and quantify some of these methodologies that I will be talking later on. In 2016, we developed a roadmap that still to this day is governing some of the actions that at the program level we are doing in order for us to move to that second phase of implementation. And here we develop an LCA PAVE, and I have a slide later on that I will dwell more into it. But it is the first software, the first version for our stakeholders to start performing life cycle assessment calculations. And with that, we also start working on resilience in 2020, and we have published some tech brief and guidance on how to look at pavement resilience. Now, it was determined in 2021 that resilience and sustainability, even though there are some connections and some similarities, they are, technically speaking, two technical areas. And from 2021 on, we decided as a program that the sustainable pavement will only focus on sustainability, and then we will dedicate some resources to explore and work on resilience topic. And as such, in this third phase, we are now moving into how we make sure that we put in practice these tools that we have done as part of phase 2. And in the ongoing section of ongoing initiatives, I will go into some of the programs that we are working currently on that phase 3. So as I mentioned, very early on our program, the first thing that we did was define what for us will be sustainable pavements. And here, this is coming directly from the document here that you see on your right, towards sustainable pavement system, a reference document. And the way that we define sustainable pavement is a pavement that is able to achieve the engineering goals. And for me, I always stop at this point, because the first thing that I hear from policymakers and top leadership when they approach this topic is, oh, so now are we willing to sacrifice performance on our systems? And the response is no. By us being sustainable and ensuring that as we are doing our project delivery, having sustainable thinking, by no means that means that we are willing or comfortable of not achieving those engineering goals. After all the engineering performance metrics that we have developed as part of our work in the transportation system are coming from one of these impacts. You can trace it back to one of these impacts. What we are saying now is that the engineering performance needs to start considering and adding probably more engineering performance to account for that environmental impact. That might be the swift or the shift of mindset that we are pursuing when we talk about sustainable. The second is that we want to preserve and ideally restore our surrounding ecosystem. And this is coming back to that discussion on climate change. And we can talk about it all day and see, that there is a science there and there are some facts happening. There are extreme weather events happening that the data is showing that they are increasing in frequency and intensity. And we should do all that we can in order to preserve and ensure that as we are taking, did I hear an interruption?
No, it's all
okay.
good. We can move on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, and that as we are taking decisions throughout our pavement system, we are not compromising the resources of the future. Now, the third bullet point is ensuring that as we are have limited resources, that we are using them wisely in all the categories here: financial, human, and environmental. And the last point, meet basic human needs as health, safety, equity, employment, comfort, and happiness. That's part as we have develop the project delivery process for us to procure and place our infrastructure. That is something that we cover throughout the planning and design and NEPA component of it. So you probably have seen this. We typically reference sustainability as the balance of the triple bottom line. In each of these categories, and let me start with the economic, which is most often the one that all engineers feel comfortable understand, because as we go through our education in our bachelor, we are taught about life cycle cost analysis, and it's the methodology used for us to quantify that cost component. The same analogy to that will be said for the environmental impacts. We have life cycle assessment that here, what we are doing is accounting for all those environmental emissions impacts in our calculations. And one that our program hasn't dedicated too much, and something that in our roadmap is our next challenge is how we move to that social life cycle assessment. And there has been some work that our environmental colleagues have put together, and that's the software that you see there, Invest. That is meant more of a planning tool, and it does account for some of the social components when we look at the pavement system. But we haven't, as a program, we haven't go into the deeps for us to establish a framework as we did with environmental. So that's, in the future, that's some of the next components. So for me to finalize this first part of the presentation, if you get anything out of it, this will be the key takeaways that I would like for you to take. Sustainability is not only about environmental impacts. Very often I hear people conflating the two terms and talking, like if they were the same, they're not. Sustainability is context sensitive. That's why the analysis and methodologies need to be cognizant of that, and it's difficult for us to create a list and say, oh, do this checklist, and if you meet this checklist, that's it, you're sustainable. We do need to account for the context that we are talking in our infrastructure. You can improve what you don't measure. So that's the reason why in the previous slide, you see that we are working on establishing methodologies for us to go through and characterize those impacts for us to inform our decision making. If it doesn't meet the intended performance, it is not sustainable. That go back to my definition, that number one. The question here is how we as engineers establish those engineering performance metrics. And we account for all of the impacts rather than just maybe one. LCA, life cycle assessment, is not the same as life cycle cost analysis. And overall sustainability is just good engineering. So with that, let me move to quantification methods. And for now on, throughout my presentation, I will focus only on environmental impacts, as that is some of the components that when I go to talk, it might be the component that is less understood or that people are more interested these days. But please know that on the other ones, on the economic and social, I could dwell the same amount of time that I will be doing just for the environmental impact. So when we talk about environmental impact, it's important for us to have two terms understand and for us to be able to recognize environmental impacts can be classified as tailpipe emissions or operational emissions. And these are the pollutants that happen from the vehicles. Once we have an infrastructure transportation on use, open for the traffic, all of those pollutants that are discharged from the vehicle's equipment and internal combustion of engine is what we call tailpipe emissions or operational. Embodied emission, and I hope that you have heard that term before, includes all the environmental impacts that come from the manufacturing, material, transport, construction, maintenance, and disposal of those transportation infrastructure materials. And here, saying it in another way, when we are looking at the pavement life cycle and how we categorize embodied and tailpipe, when you look at a pavement life cycle, and let me start here with that material production, and you go to design your pavement and then construct it, then you open it for use, and at a later time, you maintenance and end of life. Throughout the pavement life cycle, we can say that embodied carbon accounts for all of these components except that use stage. And when we are talking about these two types of emissions, it's important to say that both are very relevant, both are important, and for us to tackle climate change, we do need to address both. If we have seen and we can learn anything from our building sector, infrastructure, is that as they go and tackle one of these emissions in their side, they went full front and start targeting that operational carbon emissions. What happens is that then the pie chart of how you distribute the environmental impacts start getting bigger on the body. So even though we do recognize that operational carbon as of today, given our use of fossil fuels type of vehicles account for a majority of the percentage in our transportation infrastructure, we cannot by any means not work or not address this embodied carbon. And here in the graph, I have try to explain the differences between operational carbon and embodied, and we can have a feedback, and I will love to hear your thoughts on this. But as I look operational, as we open for the first time our pavement system, the life and how we have all those vehicles emissions happen over a long time, more than 50, 60, 70 years, depending on that life of the system. Now, on the embodied, once you have decided what type of material, what type of pavement, and you go to construct that new pavement system, all of that emissions are released all at once, what you are constructing. The same happened here in this section of maintenance. Once you have a rehabilitation project, you go back to this process of selecting material pavement, and all of those emissions are released all at once. That's what we meant for that first bullet. It can be changed during service life, and we all know all the efforts that at the nation we are doing to move to an electric vehicle type of use rather than using the current type of vehicles. So over time, those can be changed. And we will see that as we use more electric vehicles, those emissions will go down. Again, once you construct it, that's it, one and done. You construct it, it's there for the period that it lives. When we say that it's easier to decarbonize, at least looking at it from our perspective, in my role as pavement system, that's for other industry to worry and for them to tackle. There is little that a state Department of Transportation can do to help on this. There are some policy level that require mandates and law that are beyond that Department of Transportation decisions making sometimes. And now, we see that there are some major investment on clean energy and vehicle electrification. We always say that it was limited our investment, but as you are going to see on our current, there have been some investment that this past year we have received for embodied carbon. Moving on life cycle assessment, it is a technique for us to quantify environmental impact products and processes. And simply put, obviously I wouldn't have time to go through how we go and develop a life cycle assessment, but very simply, if it's the first time that you're hearing about life cycle assessment, we have some inputs on material and energy, and we go through a process of processing this information with the methodology established, and then we get out these environmental inputs. We account for the materials and energy and transportation, and as you can see from the graph here, this is another way of seeing that life cycle of any system, but here I'm referring to that pavement system. One thing that I wanted to point out as we move on, because this becomes critical, is some terminology that we are using. There are different types of life cycle assessment that can be performed throughout the life cycle of a system. When we are doing a life cycle assessment that only account for this first component, we call that cradle to gate. And I think, let me move to the next image, because this one might show it very more easily for everyone to understand. So this is another way of me showing that life cycle. This is the way that ISO standard show that life cycle stages for the life cycle assessment to be performed. What I was referring is that this cradle to gate is the composition of this raw material processing, and the manufacturing of it. And we tend to call that the production stage of a life cycle assessment, and we refer that also as A1 to A3. Once we move to construction, the transportation, and we call this to the gate because typically this is a supplier that is, that has produced the material and is ready to move to the construction site. Now, the transportation to the site and the operations that happen to construct that system, that's what we call construction stage in A4, A5. And then we have, these other modules of use stage and end of life. So we have throughout the life cycle assessment a way for us to receive inputs and outputs, and we are able to calculate each of these modules and stage. One thing that I wanted to point out, our current efforts on how we decarbonize and move towards more sustainable pavement has been focused on this A1 to A3. I will say that, any infrastructure construction project, if you want to see it in isolation, should at least consider cradle to leg. Because any given construction project, when we put out that bidding process or procurement, this becomes very relevant to the discussion. Now, and I will talk a little bit later on our current initiatives, we have received some funding for us to start moving and providing funding for our recipients to start looking into how to do LCA and EPDs, which I'm going to cover next. And that scope is looking at this complete life cycle stage from cradle to grave, as we refer, which will include production, construction, use, and end of life. So EPDs, I hope that everyone has heard that acronym before, Environmental Product Declarations. Very simply, these are reporting tool, a communication for people to, once they have done that LCA, in order to communicate those environmental impacts. They express the results of a life cycle assessment. They typically, depending on the EPD program, they should be developed using a stakeholder input. And typically, when we look at EPDs, what we always say that the most recommendation or the best practice is for to establish a product category rule, which means that all suppliers can refer to a standard. For us in the public sector, this will be similar to a spec that everyone needs to follow in order to make sure that the assumptions and considerations while performing that LCA are similar. So when we are seeing the EPDs, we can compare. So this is the typical process to establish a product category rule by category materials. This PCR should be as an underlying of an LCA performed. And with that, you are able to produce and publish environmental product declarations. Now, one thing that we like to educate everyone is that in the US right now, we do have several product category rules for product materials, concrete, cement, asphalt, steel, and many other materials that we use in our construction projects. Now, not all EPDs are the same. As you can imagine, depending on how prescriptive that rules are, that's going to be the type of EPDs that you can publish. And there are some terminologies here that we use when we are talking about environmental product declarations. We have industry-wide average, and this is just a compilation of the industry. Let's pick on the asphalt, for example. This will be an association that start collecting all the information from plants. They aggregate, they use statistical methodologies for them to provide one industry-wide environmental product declaration that represents that industry as an average. We can have EPDs that are product-specific. This one, you might have one supplier that have many manufacturing plants, and they will go and say, oh, for this mix, on all my supplier plants, I want to have one EPD. These two type of EPDs, we, Federal Highway, do not recommend to use to establish any type of benchmark for the public agencies to inform their decision-making, because they are too general, and typically they might not give you the information that you might need in order to take decisions at that project level. When we go now more into the specificity, we have facility specific. Now you are having product facility specific. So now you are getting more into providing information directly related to the product that you are acquiring or procuring. And then you have the other level, which is supply chain. Now, not only the information that supplier control is giving it to you, but more than that, let's speak now on the concrete type of mixes. Not only you're having information that supplier that is producing the concrete is giving you a specific to that material, now the cement that is a constitute of that mixture, now that's also coming from a product facility specific rather than an industry-wide that they are picking and just plugging into their LCA. These last two type of EPDs, we recommended to establish benchmark, and these are the type of EPDs that we are encouraging as we move forward to use to inform our infrastructure transportation projects to be used. Now, as I mentioned earlier, LCA PAVE is a tool that we published early in 2022. It was created with stakeholder input. It was part of what the Sustainable Pavement Technical Working Group worked for 3-4 years in order to make sure that we had a tool that everyone could use. And right now, this is available for you to download. I hope that everyone had an opportunity to go and explore it. If you haven't, I will encourage everyone to do so. And it's a good educational tool for everyone to go and use and start developing LCAs. So looking at time, I'm gonna go a little bit fast to make sure that we have time for us at the end to discuss. Key messages here, EPDs are not required by federal law, if I haven't mentioned it for now, at least. LCA and EPDs could be leveraged in all areas of the project development and delivery process, as we are going through that project delivery in order to have a more sustainable infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. We are encouraging all our recipients for them to explore how in the planning, how in the design, and also in that procuring of materials, how they can use it. And we have seen it in other countries that they have done it, and it's possible for us to do it. Cradle to Gate LCA quantifies the environmental impact associated with the material processing and production. And operation, not the same as embodied, both are key and important. So moving on really quick on what we have been doing in the past 2 years for us to address and tackle the greenhouse gas emission, and this is directly related to the administration goal of us meeting net zero by 2050. These are the main programs that we have put in place in these past 2 years. In December 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14057, and it was the first time in our nation that we were charged at the federal government for us to meet the vision of net zero. And from there, we created the first ever Buy Clean Policy Task Force for us to recommend at the federal level how and in what manner we could leverage the procurement power that the government has in order for us to procure low carbon materials. Moving from that, back last year in April, Earth Day, FHWA carried out a climate challenge program in where we explore and we challenge all our recipients to start exploring the use of EPDs and LCA. Moving now, at the end of last year on August, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and it provided to FHWA $2 billion of funding for us to do low carbon transportation material. And that's something that we haven't come out with the requirements, but this is a program now that we are putting funding for not only the State Department of Transportation, but all transportation agencies for them to, throughout their procurement process, start using low carbon materials. And last but not least, this year, we announced the Everyday Count initiative. For those that might not have heard Everyday Count, this is the program that FHWA has, a long-standing program for us to move any new innovation and for us to provide technical assistance to our state departments for a rapidly deployment of new initiatives. And we include EPDs as part of this year round of innovations. So with this, I have other slides that go into each of these programs, and I place them there for you to explore on your own time. I knew that the time that I had will not allow me to go through each of these, but I just wanted to provide you and leave you with this image. As we are looking and doing all of these programs, when you look at them in isolation, they might look like, you know, they are there and it doesn't have any significance. But as we have a vision to meet that net zero goals, we have put into place some policies in our federal government, and we are going to see this also in other states that are also giving some mandates for us to do bike-lane policies. And all of these programs are coming together as an example of how we can approach and do a building block approach on how we tackle and address the topic of addressing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing our impact on the climate. I do have other slides that I could go through, but I want to be cognizant of the instructions that I was given and allow for questions. And maybe as I get some questions, I could probably use some of the other slides that I have. So with that, I will leave you with some resources that we have, and I hope that from this presentation on, if any of the topics that we covered today you are interested to explore more on your own, you can click on any of these links, and I will also leave you with my email, and I would love to hear from all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Migdalia. We have people here in the classroom. We also have people on Zoom. I will start with Professor Alcadi's question. I don't know if Professor Alcadi wants to unmute himself, or should I ask this question?
Oh, you may.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Migdalia. That was an excellent presentation. And thanks for being our Kent seminar speaker. I have a quick question. Why do we need to include the pavement design as one of the LCA stages, given that all its parts can be included in the material stage and we can do it like any other LCA?
So let me make sure I am understanding your question, Al-Kari. So your question is related on why do we need at the design level to do a complete life cycle LCA rather than just focusing on the material production stage?
Right.
Yes. And that's a very good question, and I'm glad that you asked me that. And the reason why we as FHWA always encourage for us to do a whole life cycle is because as we, and here now I'm speaking on behalf of the owners of the infrastructure that we are going through that project delivery, as we are taking decisions and deciding on what type of material, what type of treatment, we always want to make sure that we are taking the best decision and maximizing our cost and minimizing that environmental impact. There are some techniques that when you look only at the material and the production, they might be very low environmental impact, but they don't last. And every 5 years, you will have to go and do it. And when you look at the whole life cycle and you look at that part of the use stage and end of life, those environmental impact will go really high. So having a good understanding, and for us at the design level, when we are deciding what material, what treatment, and those decisions at that level, it's important that we are doing a full life cycle LCA, similar to what we do with LCCA. The analogy here is that if you are only doing the initial construction when you are accounting for cost, what could happen? That you are missing all those maintenance and rehabilitation that might happen if you are not accounting for that, and then the cost will skyrocket if you don't account it in that initial LCCA that you are performing. So analogy to this will be that for us to do our life cycle assessment needs to be the complete life cycle to ensure that that decision that we are taking on treatments, materials, at that design level, we are taking the best decision to minimize the environmental impacts. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, if I may follow, I think I agree with your answer 100%. My question is, when you draw the LCA stages, you added the design after the materials. And I was thinking that the design is comprehensive, include all the other stages, which you answer it in the way that I do believe. So I think we are on the same on the same page, but I think included it in the cycle is what got me a little confused. So I think we're on the same page. Thank you so much again.
Do we have questions here in the classroom? Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
I do.
Yes. Okay, great. Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I know this is maybe the major topic in pavement engineering right now is really how we're going to implement some of these sustainability requirements and EPDs and all of that. Actually, we have a lot of speakers talking about that recently. I guess from the perspective of pavement materials, that's my background, and I'm wondering, how are you thinking about the performance? Are there going to be classification that, as you talked about at the beginning, sustainability is not just environmental impact of production, but really, if a company comes and says this material is performing so much better than anything on the market right now, but its production has a high GHG impact, how are you looking at that moving forward?
That is an excellent question. And that's why I always like to start with sustainability definition and what truly sustainability is, because people conflate it and think that sustainability means that we will take the environmental impacts completely over the other impacts. And the reality is that environmental impacts is critical for us to tackle the climate change. But at the same time, we need to be cognizant and ensure that as we are taking decisions, we are not having unintended consequences. And the social and economic impacts are important as well. And as you mentioned, when we talk about material performance, I always find it interesting because it's difficult for us to see and trace back that our current engineering performance, let's pick one, durability. Why, as engineers, we care so much about durability, and for us, it's important that our materials have that durability component and performance, and it meets certain specs and criteria. When you go back of why we are doing durability, it is because that economic impact. If we have materials that they are not durable and they don't last the intended life cycle, we then have to go back and disrupt the user. So there is also a social component. So what I always say to folks that all our engineering performance, you can go and trace it back to some of these impacts. Now, what we are at the environmental impact, what we have put a lot of focus on is in that global warming potential indicator. We have other environmental impacts that also should be considered and should be looked at. But now, knowing what we know about climate change, now we are using greenhouse as that environmental performance. And what you are gonna see moving forward is that the specifications that we put out on materials will have that minimum greenhouse, or that maximum, I should say, that maximum global warming potential that a material should have. Everything starts for us to know where we are, establishing a baseline. That's why I included the benchmarking process, because once we know where we are, then we can establish ranges for us to make sure that our materials are meeting. Now, that environmental, that global warming performance, if we want to call it that way, performance metrics, needs to be in combination with all other performance. Does that mean that we might need to revisit our current performance and the ranges that we are willing or that we accept today? Maybe. But that is part of the analysis that we need to do, including all of the impact and understanding how in the system all of the impacts are affected. And let me say one thing at the end. All of this, to finish this thought, all of this is thought at a programmatic level. As we are doing project level decisions, it might be possible that in one project, we take the economic impact over the environmental. In other projects, it might look that the environmental is the driver of the decisions. at the end of the day, what we want to see is that at a system level, we are moving toward the sustainable thinking. And as we are taking decisions at that programmatic level, we are considering all of the impacts. As soon as we get into the details on how we make decisions at the project level, it gets complicated, and it might be not possible to achieve that sustainable thinking for all projects and achieve that minimizing environmental impact while maximizing the cost benefit. But as we move forward, that is part of what we are looking, and the bike-clean policies are trying to achieve.
Excellent, thank you. I have one question very quick too. Thank you for the excellent presentation. I was just thinking here, when we were talking about LCA cradle to grave, we're talking about like 40 years, maybe 30 years. And we don't exactly know what's going to be like the reality in 10, 20 years in terms of how carbon intensive will be like the electric vehicles penetration or the rehabilitation strategies. How is FHWA taking this into account, for example, a tool like the LCA tool you have?
Thank you, and I didn't got into that when I was talking about our life cycle assessment framework. Let me share my screen really quick because it will make sense for us to see it. So when we are looking at the life cycle stages in our current framework, we have considerations and assumptions on how we go and do all of them. And in the use here, in the big one, and if that your question pertains to this model here on the use, how we act for that pavement vehicle interaction and that emission in our tooling, LCA PAVE, we didn't account for it right now. It's not being considered. Yesterday, FHWA, we did the kickoff of a use stage subgroup, and my hopes is that out of that group, we can all, as a community, have a consensus on what models and what factors we should be accounting when we talk about that pavement vehicle interaction that we know is an important component of this. You bring excellent questions as we are now moving to electric vehicles and other type of energy use. That becomes very relevant, and Al-Khari, he's part of the group. So I will let Al-Khari answer or add anything that he thinks pertinent.
Well, I'll leave it, of course, to you. This is your day today. I'll tell them later. Thank you.
Asad, yes.
Thank you for the nice presentation. My question is on the social LCA. So I was wondering that why hasn't work on social LCA progressed as it has for environmental and economic LCAs? And what challenges FHWA have identified that if we overcome those, that would enable the social life cycle assessment studies of pavements?
Excellent question. And when I got into the position in March of last year, in my mind, I had that I was gonna go directly to the social and start creating groups in our feedback group for us to go and start demystifying that component. I will say that the social components comes with a lot of complexity. As soon as we try to quantify this social aspect, sometimes we like to see a number, but those numbers, we need to make sure that are comprehensive and that are not giving us just to have a quantified number. We are not missing or not being able to characterize all of that social component. With that said, I am partnering with our resilience group because we have seen that in that social aspect, we can start at the qualitative level for us to ensure that we are including all of the factors. And right now, we are exploring what other stakeholders has done for us to get into the topic and how at the pavement system level, we can then quantify those impacts. Not sure that that's, the complete answer to your question, but that's where, we are at the program. I'm looking for the next 2-3 years for us to start diving in as a program and see, if social life cycle assessment is the right tool for us to quantify, and if it is, how we then come with a framework as we did for the environmental impact.
Just last question. Lara is asking, she's saying, thank you for the great presentation. When you show the life cycle stages, why do we consider the recycling reuse as a separate stage and not part of the EOL of the LCA?
That is a good question, and the reason is that in that particular stage we are accounting for some inputs that are different. And let me see if I can show you again where we have it. In the end of life, it is more of, once you are deconstructing or the mold that oops, I think that there was a glitch. Are you able to see my screen?
No, can you try to share it again?
It's not allowing me. I don't know what happened.
Try again.
I don't know what might be happening. It's not allowing me. So anyway, at that stage on the reuse recycling, we are accounting for what happened once you take out, that materials, and the way to model and include the factors is different from that end of life. And I might not be, an expert on this topic, and I don't know if anyone would like to talk more about it. But I know that the modeling and how the inputs that we put there are different, are considered different than in the end of life.
Okay. Again, thank you so much for being with us today. It was really, really great to have you here. And let's thank again, Migdalia Carrion-Alers.